Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. I'm really sorry for the delay this evening. We had gremlins and we've had to swap streams over to a different stream. So thank you for joining us when you do join us, or you'll probably pop up in a minute and see. So hello to Mandy. Mandy Robotham is a author and she has written 7 novels, all historic, Mandy?
All historic so far, yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to just tell us about your latest book, which is the so I'm actually putting it down now. So the last storyteller, the hidden, yeah, sorry,
hidden
yeah.
storyteller, yeah.
The hidden storyteller. I put the latest storyteller, but it's not. It's the hidden storyteller.
Yeah, hidden's a really sort of big buzzword at the moment in titles, so I think they like to get that one in there. So yeah, I've got a copy here. There we go. It's out on Thursday. It's my first foray into crime fiction, historical crime, because I'm a big lover of crime fiction. And although the others have, yes, there's been spy elements. There's certainly been Nazis. There's been a lot of. There's been the Stasi in one of them. That it was to do with the Berlin Wall, so there was a lot of spy espionage in that. But this is my first one where I've gone properly into crime, and it's set in 1946 Hamburg, when the war is over, and returning reporter Georgie Young, who features in my third book, she comes back to find out what's going on in post-war Europe, really, to report on it. And then she meets up with a detective, a nice, irascible, grumpy, dubious detective, because of course they've all got to be like that, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. It's like it's the rules.
It's the rules, and I like my detectives nice and grumpy. And he's called Harry Schroeder, and he is part of the German detective division called the Kripo. And then they run about Hamburg, and there is a multiple serial killer. Well, you're not able to use the word serial killer that early on, but a multiple killer on the loose.
And yeah, I mean, I found it I really liked the setting actually in Hamburg, because I quite often books are set in wartime, but I actually really liked the setting in sort of post-war and very recently post-war as well. And there's still so much of the war still apparent, isn't there, in the book?
Yeah, it just doesn't go away, you think. And of course, I suppose in Britain, yes, we had lots of bombed out cities, but once the theatre of war went away, peace, we had peace, although, it took a long time to get things back together. Whereas in Germany, there was still, and across Europe, there were still bands of vigilantes running about. It was still quite lawless. The whole infrastructure had gone. It needed to be built up again. There was still lots of acrimony between different groups. So yeah, it was a bit of a shock to find out it was pretty dire for quite some time afterwards. And there were a few people that went out and reported on it. Victor Galantz, the publisher, was one of them. And so his diaries and his reporting was was vital for my research on that.
So that was one thing I was gonna say to you, is when you sort of start, obviously, with historic fiction or crime fiction, as this one is, there is, I imagine, quite a large element of research. And sort of how long does that, do you put aside to sort of do that for your writing?
Generally about 2 months. So I start to gather all my resources and books, and I spend a good solid 2 months reading, internet searching, images, Google. That usually includes a trip to wherever I'm going to place my book. So I went for a weekend to Hamburg, and to, a lot of the places that feature in the book. A good solid 2 months. And then I know when I'm ready to start writing, when I started to get a bit itchy about scenarios and characters, and I feel like, oh, I need to write that down. And then usually I'll start doing that. And then throughout the writing period, I still carry on researching all the way through.
Yeah, that's because I wondered whether, do you sort of have an idea? I mean, obviously you must have some idea when you start which sort of, you know, where you're going, or maybe not. I don't know. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I have to give a synopsis to my editor, who then says, yeah, that sounds like a goer. So yeah, they know which period I'm setting it in, they know where I'm setting it, they know the general storyline. I generally have quite a strong beginning. I have a vague end, and then the bit in between, just I meander. I always think of it like a game of snakes and ladders, where you've got, you know, start at one end, and on the other end of the board is your finish, and then you sort of you wiggle your way around and you meander your way around. So I'm a terrible, what they call a pantser writer.
You are a pantser, are you? Yeah.
I'm a pantser. Yeah, definitely a pantser. I've tried planning, but I can't do it.
So do you find then, because you're a pantser as well, that because you haven't got that sort of, you know, this is where I'm going sort of thing, that actually your research can basically change the story quite dramatically?
Yes, especially so on occasions I've set a whole book around one particular fact, and then if I find out, then suddenly you might find out that actually no, that isn't true, and then so you have to change, or you have to change a date, and you have to change all your dates around and things like that, because there's certain things you can play with. It is fiction. You can play with a certain amount of things, but there are things in history that you cannot move. The end of the war, the beginning of the war, you know, you can't move those, they're immovable. And yes, so you can play a bit, but you can't play and take liberties with history, really.
Because the characters, I really liked Harry, I really liked Georgie, and I particularly like Georgie because she's had a really interesting past, and as you say, she was in book 3 as well, so I imagine that you know more about her from that one. But I didn't feel that I needed to read that book to know about her. It's just I came across that by researching and things. So but she's you know, she's left Germany before, we sort of know that, and as we find out through the book, without giving anything away, that things have happened. She's married to Max, and she's, you know, things have happened, but she's quite ahead of her time, isn't she? You know, a single woman. I mean, not single, but she is single in as much as she's a single woman traveling. Although she's married, she very much sort of projects herself as a single woman, doesn't she?
She does, yeah. And again, you have to, especially generally my female characters are quite feisty. I refuse to write anything else, because I was a midwife for 20 years. You don't get anything more feisty than a midwife. So I was surrounded by all these feisty women. And yes, it's true, you know, that after the war, whatever women were doing, whether they were working in munitions or they were doing the really heavy machinery jobs or anything like that, you know, once the war was ended and the men came back, or a proportion of them came back, they were expected to go back into the home, into the kitchen, having babies. And I kind of didn't really need to know what Georgie did in the war. The book 3 ends at the beginning of the war. I felt like we could guess what she did. She traveled across Europe with Max. You know, there was lots of scrapes and you know, close calls and all that sort of thing. I wanted to know, I asked myself, what would she do afterwards? Would she go back into that role that she was expected to? And I thought, probably not, actually. So I think she's very much based on a journalist and writer called Martha Gellhorn, who was a fantastically crazy, out there woman who happened to be one of Hemingway's wives, but actually was far more than that. She was, you know, a far better writer than he ever was, and she was just really out there. And also, of course, people like Lee Miller as well, the photographer Lee Miller, who was also out there doing post-war and wartime stuff. You know, so she is based on real people. She's also the reporter that I wanted to be. I spent my first years before I was a midwife as a reporter, and I wished I could be someone like Georgie. I was pretty bad reporter, so I don't think I would. So she's my projection of who I wanted to be.
That's quite nice though, isn't it? It's being able to make a character that you would like to be. I guess you can give her all the attributes that you sort of would like to have, and you can maybe sort of like almost live her through the pages, really. I mean, I think she is so well written that you do really feel like you know her at the end.
Yes, and I think you're right. You don't need to read book 3 to know what a kind of character she is.
Yeah.
I think her humour, I'd like to think that her humour comes through, and especially in the way that her and Harry bounce off each other.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite funny.
And he was meant to be just a side character when I started writing him. Then suddenly he became the main character, I think, or one of the main characters. And I absolutely love him to bits. I mean, you know, I really do love Harry. And Harry's going to make another appearance again.
Oh, interesting. Sorry, my cat has just decided to come in and make a big noise. Right. Come on, madam. Sorry, I'm just going to eject her out of the room. There you go. It's funny, they always know. She never comes in this room, and she'll sit outside the door and she'll say, "Oh, can I come in and see what you're doing?"
I know, naughty, aren't they? I haven't got my dog here.
Yes, I think it's interesting, isn't it? How it goes through, how you sort of start off in one, you know, with a character like Harry, who, when you read the book, is quite a, you know, he's a major character, but actually to know that he wasn't intended to be like, so that do they sometimes sort of take on lives of their own as you go through?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm always surprised by characters popping up, always. And they sometimes just push themselves in and you can't get rid of them. And again, the third character in the book, because it's done from 3 different voices, is Meta, and she's a refugee. And she popped up just because of the suitcase scenario. I won't give too much away, but it pivots around a suitcase, a suitcase which was very valuable in post-war times. And Meta was just meant to be carrying the suitcase, and then suddenly she blossomed into something else entirely and got wrapped up in the plot as well.
Well, she is, again, like Harry, you know, a fundamental part of the story, isn't she? And I think because you meet her quite early on as well, without giving too much away, but actually I think that shows from quite early on also the type of person that Georgie is, because the sort of action that she has when she meets Meta, which I won't go into too much details, is not a normal reaction, is it, to what happens to her? Much to the bemusement of the sergeant that she's with.
Yeah, who also turns out to be, you know, something else entirely as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're constantly surprising me, and they do. It sounds a bit of a cliche, but they do actually take on a life of their own. And sometimes you really look forward to getting back to, I'm writing a chapter with Harry today. Writing, you know.
Did you write them as sort of? Did you write them with their different voices, or did you write them as like a continuous sort of narrative?
No, I tend to write them as different voices. My editor really likes, who I've worked with on lots of books, and the editor who was incoming on this one, very much likes them separated into chapters rather than melding different voices into within one chapter, to keep it straight. I also like putting on dates. I like putting on where things are. I know I'm a big reader myself. I like to know where I am.
I completely agree.
A time frame. I don't want to work at, unless it's a mystery, unless it's a mystery or a magical or dystopian or something. I like to know exactly where I am rather than having to spend time working at it. I'd like to immerse myself in the book rather than just think about what date it is.
Yeah, it can take quite a lot of energy sometimes, can't it, to sort of try and figure out where you are. And I think I sort of sometimes think, you know, it's quite clever, but also sometimes I don't want to be clever when I'm reading. I just want to read.
Yeah.
So I'm sure some people really like the challenge of sort of working out, you know, the voices and things. But actually, I'm quite simple when it comes to that. I quite like to know who I'm reading about, where they are, and you know, quite straightforward. I guess that's horses for courses, isn't it? Some people I imagine love that sort of challenge of.
I think I write like I'd like to read it in that case, in those scenarios. And I think if it's not part of the mystery, that we're trying to solve as readers, then I don't need to ask the reader that to work it out.
Going back to you mentioned earlier that you so you haven't always been a writer. You say you've been a journalist and you were a midwife for quite a large part of your life. What was your journey from that to being a writer?
So yeah, I came out of university many moons ago, first time around, and I was a trainee reporter on some local newspapers, and I did a few shifts on the Nationals, worked for the Evening Standard, that sort of thing. And then I was a magazine journalist for a while, and I wrote features, and that was okay, and that was fine. I really enjoyed it. And then I had a baby, and that completely blew everything out of the water, like it does.
Like they
do. But I had a sort of epiphany on the day that he was born. He's now 29, so it's quite a while ago. And I thought, I've got to do this. I really have to do this. It was a blue light moment. And so I trained for 3 years to be a midwife. And then I worked for about 20 years. And all that time, I was still writing. I was still thinking, I want to write this book. Since about the age of 9, I've wanted to write a book. And I wrote for midwifery journals, and I wrote for nursing magazines, etc., that sort of thing. Yeah. And then when my children, 2 boys, I mean, boys don't need their mums after a certain, well, my boys didn't.
No.
After there was a point where I thought, I can't use them as an excuse any longer. I really, really, if I'm going to write this book, then I have to get on and do it. And so I joined a couple of writing groups, and I did a couple of courses. And then I thought, I need constant nudging. So I joined a part-time master's in creative writing, and I did that over 2 years. And then when I came out of that, I still hadn't got much of an idea for a novel. And then just one day something popped into my head. It literally does pop into your head, I think. And I was having lunch with another writer. I'm going to name drop here, with the lovely Katie Ford, who also lives in my town.
Oh, really?
She lives in Stroud, yeah. And I said to her, I've got this idea for a book. And I explained it. And I said, I think it's a short story or a novella or something like that. And she went, oh, don't be so daft. She said, it's your first novel. Just go away and write it. And so when Katie Ford says that to you, you go away and do it.
Yeah.
And, that was the first one. So it took about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years between ending the MA and then getting my first book published.
Yeah.
And then it's been just practically 1 a year from beyond that.
So like 1 a year is generally what you sort of do. So yeah, I mean that's quite some going, isn't it? To have one, because I guess you're probably writing now whilst you're promoting this one.
Yeah, there's generally one in the planning, one in the marketing, and one in the writing going on in that scenario. So yeah, it's been quite busy. I consider that I'm a jobbing writer. You don't get to sort of contemplate your navel for a couple of years before you thinking about it, mooning about it. There's a lot of writers I know that are like me, that are jobbing writers, that are, we do it every day.
Yeah.
We do it like a job with passion.
Yeah. Well, that's good, isn't it? Because I mean, I guess, if you've wanted to write a book since you were 9, then the passion is definitely there, and very, it hasn't sort of fizzled out, but actually now you've done it, you still continue to want to give it that passion.
Oh God, yeah. It's just, if I don't write for a few days, I certainly know it. Well, my husband certainly knows it as well. I get very tetchy if I don't write for a few days.
And what sort of inspired you to write the historical side of fiction and now crime fiction?
Well, I think what it is your first book, you just write a book.
Yeah.
You don't understand where it's going. You don't have any idea what genre it's going to be put into. So I happened to write a book about a fictional Hitler's baby, basically. So obviously it was set during wartime, and then somebody buys it and they go, "This is a wartime historical drama."
Yeah.
And you go, "Oh, okay." And so if it sells okay, then they say, "Oh, for your next book, we would like, a similar setting. And that's
Right.
how you sort of get into that genre. And if it sells well, your readers want more of the same, of that, that same type of book. So you end up, but I've always wanted to write crime, and I've been to Harrogate book, crime festival a couple of times. Sat in the audience looking, wantonly at all the people up on the stage going, I want to be one of you. And so I read crime. And I read spy. That's the big thing that I do. And I do like historical crime as well. I like Abir Mukherjee is one of my favorite writers. Historical crime. Wasim Khan. I like to read in areas where I don't write. So Victorian age sort of medical crime dramas I quite like as well. Mark Billingham is a big favourite. I love a good old, like I say, a good old grumpy detective like Tom Thorne.
Yeah, you said that. You said at the beginning you like your. I mean, I think detectives, they're good. I mean, if they have want them to have a bit of baggage, don't you? And possibly a drink problem, or normally maybe a divorced wife or two. Or maybe never married. I'm thinking sort of Poirot
like character.
Morse, that sort of. But sort of the quirkiness of them, isn't it, as well, of having that. And I guess because you said about Harry might make a reappearance, and because am I right in saying all your books are standalones? They're all
standalones. You wouldn't need to read the whole series. They're not in a series at this stage, but Harry had such an impact on me that I thought, no, I want to see him again. I want to know a little bit more about Harry. So I've the one I'm writing now, I transplanted him somewhere else entirely and put him in a sort of alien land and see how he gets on with that, and see if it makes him any more grumpy.
A grumpy man. That's how original.
But he's sort of grumpy in his nice way. He
is. He's not offensively grumpy, is he? He's just a bit bad tempered and
but also he's quite a modern man as well.
Well, he doesn't sort of bat an eyelid at her, does he, really, when he meets
her? And he doesn't bat an eyelid at female officers working alongside him, because of course the true point about the post-war is that most of the men had died, or a good portion of the men had died, and so they needed to find police officers wherever they could, and so they recruited women as well. So he doesn't bat an eyelid. A good officer is a good officer to him. It doesn't matter.
And with going back to the sort of setting, how sort of where does that sort of come in your sort of your pantser plotting? Does it happen when you've done your research, or do you know that? So do you know that it's going to be, I mean, obviously Germany, and the timeline, or is it even vaguer than that when you start?
Oh no, I know from the beginning where because that directs my research, so I know exactly where the location's going to be, because then I have to direct my research in that way and go looking for it. So I knew I wanted to do Hamburg because I knew it was a centre for the British occupied forces. I knew that was going to be my scenario, and I'd done Berlin three books in a row. I think I'd done one of them was around the wall period in the 60s, but I don't think I finished with Berlin yet, but I think I needed a little different location, and so I thought Hamburg would be good. And it was only then I started to realize how badly it was affected during the war, once I'd started researching, and how badly bombed it was, and what a shell of a city it became, and how many of those displaced wandering people there were that made their way to northern Germany, because they were quite a few of them were actually trying to escape the Russian sector rather than go into the east, back into the east. They were trying to keep west, as it were.
Because I don't think I'd ever really even, like you said, if you say sort of post-war Germany, you immediately sort of think Berlin, or you know, and yeah, so I was really interested in that side of it and the setting, because it wasn't a place that I particularly knew.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's a beautiful city as well. It's actually beautiful. And I went over there for a weekend and I met a really great guy. I booked on one of these walking tours. And because I don't speak German, I asked for an English speaker. And actually, it was a guy called Gordon, who's an expat. He's a British expat. He lives in Germany, speaks German. He loves Hamburg. They do it all voluntarily. And he became a really, really important part of that book because he was a keen historian and he would go ferreting around for me in magazines and German websites. And I would just ask him anything and he'd pop back with the answer. So he's a major part of the research in that book. So thanks, Gordon, once again.
Did you do you sort of, because obviously we were talking at the beginning when we were having the problems with the technology, obviously, you know, in some ways it's more straightforward to write historical because you've got the past there, and you know, obviously there's not mobile phones and all that sort of thing. Is that another thing that sort of attracts you to the historical writing, is that sort of that you can sort of look back at everything?
Yes, definitely. I am so not a technical person, as you probably realised. I don't think I could ever write a contemporary crime thriller because I couldn't deal with the technology. So in any of my books, people have to be able to run into a phone box and leave a note. So I'm currently writing a spy fiction book set in the 60s. And, you know, people are running about having to use telephones, like real telephones, no mobiles, and they have to run into phone boxes and leave messages under the telephone table with chewing gum and things like that. I really like that.
Yeah, I do.
Retro feel. That you know, people have to move about in a certain way in order
they have to work hard, don't they, for it? Because it's not there in your hand, you know. It's not like, oh, I always remember thinking about do you remember the TV show Quantum Leap?
Yes. Yeah.
And like literally he basically had a mobile phone, didn't he, where he used to like look up, and I thought, well, that just wouldn't work now because he could have his own mobile phone and look up what was happening. I know he went like backwards and forwards, but it's just like, I think it makes the characters have to work harder, because it's a bit like people when they do like the locked room, isn't it? It's sort of, you know, there's no way in or out, so you have to do that because if you're going to do that, that's the only way really you can get away with not having the technology.
And it's necessarily slower as well because, of course, you have to cover ground. Rather than just text somebody, you actually have to cover ground or guess where they are and telephone them wherever they are, in a house or an office or something like that. So you have to think about those sorts of things much more. And I really like that. I mean, I'm a real sucker for, you know, any kind of spy, Cold War, retro, anything like that, you know. I think I'll endlessly be watching that.
Did the so the murderer, did you always know how the murderer was going to sort of develop, and how, obviously we can't go into too much detail so we don't want to give away the spoilers, but they have a very clear, we find out quite early, don't we, that they have a motive for their killing.
Yes, I had to be very, very careful though as to what identity the killer has. And again, I've got to be very careful here as to what identity the killer has. So that was definitely an evolving piece. So I didn't have a clear idea. I knew why they did it. I knew how they did it. I just didn't know quite who that person was until it came out in the wash. I sometimes think, oh, it will just come out in the wash. Of course it will. Of course it will.
And it did.
Yes, I think so.
Did you what were the sort of fundamental differences when you were writing? That was there anything that really sort of surprised you about writing a crime to just writing a fiction? Did you?
Yes, it's mostly about writing not in the war, because war makes things happen. As one of my writers' friends once said, it's a gift for writers, because you've already got a platform, you've already got a stage.
Yeah.
If you say the Blitz to someone, they've got an instant image, roughly what it looks like. They know what happened in the war, roughly. We've all been taught about it at school. So it happens, you know, and if you want something, you need something to happen, you make a bomb go off, or you know, you make a house fall down, or someone gets trapped under the rubble, or something like that. You know, it's full of happenings. Whereas post-war, there are no more planes, there are no more bombs. You've got to make things happen yourself. And that was a challenge. That was a real challenge, I have to say, because I'd not done that before, except with the 1960s book. But that was then based around the Berlin Wall. So there were things happening there, you know. So,
well, that's
and I really had to remind myself that the crime plot was central. Crime readers want to read about a crime plot. And so everything else was not window dressing, that sounds too blasé. Everything else was secondary to the plot.
So whereas before, I guess when you're telling a story, you're telling the story, but you need to be able to, because also you need to be able to sort of plant those seeds of, you know, who is it, you know, who could have done this, but without giving away too much. Was that more of a challenge as well?
That was definitely more of a challenge. I mean, I think in my sixth book, there was quite a lot of espionage. It was between London and Amsterdam, and there was quite a lot of sort of radio. It's all about coding and radios, and but at the end of the day, in war, you know who the culprit is. It's the Nazis. The Nazis are the culprit. You know, in a way, what's happening there. Whereas, definitely this time, I think long and hard about red herrings, giving away too many spoilers, giving away too much. And I'm a newbie. I'm a baby crime writer, so I think I've got to hone as well. Keep getting better.
Yeah, I mean it's fun, isn't it, though, to be able to have, because quite often people do get sort of, you know, pigeonholed into that genre, and that's where you're going to stay. And so to be able to stay actually quite true to the genre that you like, but actually to be able to develop that into crime as well is quite exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, and but also being quite true to the history as well. True to the framework of the history. You know, you can't suddenly say, you know, men went to the moon in 1950. They don't. So you've got to stay true to the history and keep an eye again on what women were doing during that time. So I'm now writing about the early 50s, and again, of course, you know, apart from those extraordinary women like Georgie, women weren't terribly powerful in the workplace or in, you know, in politics, or in, you know, it was the odd one, but they weren't terribly powerful as a mass. And so you've got to keep an eye on that as well, while still engaging female readers.
Because I think you know, there definitely is, if you go back to any sort of, you know, even most historical, there are strong women. It's just they're hidden by men generally. So it's quite nice to be able to be, you know, it must be quite nice to be able to uncover those and give those women a voice, even though back then they probably didn't have one, but actually you're giving them that voice now in the shape of your characters.
And like I say, they're all based roughly on someone. Perhaps some more than others, but Georgie's definitely a sort of an amalgam of that type of woman who we think you'd like to be there reporting for you in a foreign clime somewhere. You know, a bit like the Kate Adie or the
I was thinking of Kate Adie, of that sort of, but she's not, you know, she isn't fazed by things that, and I imagine actually, you know, my nan lived through the war and she wasn't, you know, she worked in working in the Spitfire factory, and she wasn't fazed by anything. 18, they had to go off and do it. So she was, I think they were tough women.
They were incredibly tenacious. And
yeah,
I love talking to older people. I'm always sitting in cafes writing and knitting and, with my dog. And I'm always striking up conversations with older women. And they're just incredibly tenacious and like, oh, yeah, well, we just got on with it,
Yeah.
They're not snowflakes in any way, shape or form.
No, not at all. Do you sort of thinking about what you're working on next? Sort of, do you find it like that when you're writing the ideas, is it like popping up in your head? When you're writing one, is the next idea coming along, or is there ever a lull?
Not so far. Not so far. When I first started writing, I thought, right, I've got the idea for this one novel.
Yeah.
It may be my only one. And it's a bit like, I suppose, having a job. When you're applying for a new job, it's easier when you're already in a job. And that's the same with writing, is that once you're writing one book, suddenly you just having to get your notebook out and write down, popping up. I mean, at 3 out of 4 of those you'll discover have already been written. So, you'd strike those off the list. But then there's the one where you think, that could be a goer. Or I ask my agent and she says, oh no, that's not been written before.
It amazes me, like, when you sort of, you read as many books as we do, and you see so many that actually, I know they always say there's like so many different stories, isn't there? But there's so many different stories and variations that you can stay within a story. So it's like the possibilities are endless, really.
Yeah. It's just it's getting that little nugget. I always call it the little nugget. The one little thing that sparks the story. And for me, in this book, it was the suitcase. The suitcase was my one big fact that I came across. That suitcases were were valuable currency in post-war period, because with a suitcase you could put your minimal amount of possessions in it. But not only could you do that, and you could carry them around without getting them dirty or dropping them or whatever, but you could actually sit on a suitcase. And once you sat on a suitcase, people respected the space around you. It's like doing that psychological thing of drawing a chalk circle around you. People walk around it. And so it became not like a home, but it just became your place. If you sat on your suitcase, people did respect that space around you. So they were very valuable, apparently. And I read this and I thought, there's my little nugget. There's my little nugget. And like I say, that's how the character of Meta popped up, but also how the whole pivot of the story starts and ends. It comes full circle.
No, it's amazing, isn't it, really, that just like one little nugget, as you say, like then sparks the whole books.
So it's just like planting an acorn and then watching it grow and it branch out into all sorts of different things into my head. And sometimes I do use things like spider charts in order to try and make a bit of sense of the things going on in my head. I don't think you could call that planning. Don't think it's anything like planning. It's just trying to make sense of all the little sprigs going off into my head, trying to make them connect up, really.
I think it's what works for you, isn't it? Some people are really like staunch planners and plan every single sentence, and some people just write as they go, and it's what works for you, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think pantsing is far riskier because there are days when you open up the computer and you think and sometimes it just doesn't work, and that's why I normally have 2 projects on the go at once, because then if one was not working, then I'll just go and work on the other one.
You can sort of
you feel like you're not guilty of wasting your time for that day. So sometimes I have 2 projects going at once. Other times it could just be you just have to give up for the day and put it down.
Draw a line under it.
Draw a line under it. It's not working today, and then tomorrow it will be. That's just the nature of it, of the whole thing.
If you anybody's watching tonight who sort of was considering writing, historical fiction or historical crime, what sort of advice would you give them for where to start? Or
well, the obvious one is to read lots, which I still do now. But I think for me, it was getting on a course. It was getting on a course of being with other writers, because it's such a thing where it's not lonely, it's more solitary. It's a solitary business. I do sometimes write opposite a friend. We do physically write opposite each other.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But mostly it's solitary.
Yeah.
And I found, so I went to just a very local village writing group to begin with. Then I went to a Guardian weekend writing thing, which was a very big motivator, I think, for me. And then I went and got on the masters. So you don't need to. There's plenty out there. There's lots online, but it's having that community and having that feedback, and also people you literally have to write, because if you don't turn up that week with something written, it's a bit of egg on your face. And for me personally, it keeps me writing. So I have a lot of contact with other writers, and where I live in Stroud, we have a lot of writers.
Yeah, that's
here.
good though, isn't it? That you've got that sort of community that you can, sort of tap into, because I think that is, I think the writing groups seem to pop up a lot, where people get that sort of feedback and they can share, their work and get beta readers and that sort of thing. So
so, and also we have things like plot surgery, when I can call up any one of a few people and say, help, I need plot surgery.
Excuse me, sorry.
I need plot surgery, and and then suddenly, okay, you'll sit around and have a coffee and go, right, I'm here. What's can you help with what's happens next?
Can you help me? What's happening?
Yeah.
Or
so
not,
really
or what's not happening, or what's not happening.
And sometimes it's just like, oh, I've had a bad week, and someone else goes, oh, so have I. Hey ho.
It's just like a normal job then, really.
It is totally like a normal job. Or having very, very young children when you don't have any sleep, and everybody goes, oh, I'm so tired, and it just makes you feel better.
So am I.
Yeah. It makes you feel better.
So you said you like to read, and have you read anything recently that you sort of recommend that for everybody watching?
I have just started reading the series of Donna Leon Brunetti.
Oh yeah,
mysteries. I'm a late starter to this. It's my mother-in-law that's put me onto it. She's a big fan.
Very popular,
and she's got all of them, I think. So I started off in her library with number 1, and now I'm on number 2. And I find that I really like him. A little bit grumpy, a little bit irascible, but loves his coffee. I really like that. I'm big on coffee, and not so much this book, but some of the other books have been, there's a fair coffee content in there. So I really like him, and I absolutely adore Venice. So for me, it's just like, it's like a soothing balm to read Brunetti.
That's really lovely, isn't it? When you pick up a series of an author that you haven't read before, and you've got loads to read.
Yes,
that's such a treat.
Yeah, and I am really, really looking forward to the next Abir Mukherjee set in the 20s India. And I said to I bumped into him and I said, hurry up and write that book, because I'm waiting for it. Hurry up.
Yeah, get on with it. Come on.
What else have I read? I've read a few Le Carriers recently. I find him a bit difficult to read, but I feel like if I want to write spy crime, then I really need to read The Master. And so those are the ones I've read recently. But I will pretty much pick up any kind of crime book if I can. And of course, Mick Herron, Slow Horse. I'm rereading Slow Horses actually as well.
Yeah, we've got that to watch on TV. Apparently, everybody thinks it's amazing.
Brilliant, absolutely spot on, brilliant.
I've got that one to look forward to. You mentioned earlier about what you were working on, and you said you were working on a sort of a spy espionage. Can you tell us any more about it?
Only that she's middle-aged. She's a middle-aged housewife spy. That's about all I can probably say at the moment.
And is that
Mid-19th.
next year's book, or is that like
It will probably be
year's?
2025. I'm hoping
Right.
2025.
Yeah.
So it's in the very early stages of being submitted. But yeah, she's another character that I really like.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to like your characters as well.
Yeah, I think so.
And another sidekick that was supposed to be a side character and grew much, much bigger out of that. So yeah, but I adore spy movies, films, TV series, books, anything like that, and I'd like to write more.
Well, they say, don't they, write what you love or write what you know. So know, so
spy midwife next.
Fine. Well, it's niche, but you never know. There might have been
definitely one. Niche. Yeah, I'm not sure I'll go with that one.
I'm just looking at the time. Just before we go, I've got a couple more questions about. So, what is the best and the worst thing about being a writer?
The best is I get to do what I love. I get to do my hobby as a job.
Yeah.
And the worst is the middle of a book, I think.
It's funny. Heard that. Other people say that it's like the middle.
Yeah. It's the wading through treacle, pulling teeth, don't know where it's going. It's all a bit of a mess. How am I going to resolve this? And all of a sudden it's like, it's how I used to describe labour to some women at antenatal groups. In the middle of a contraction, you think you're going up the hill, you're going up and up and up. It's never ever going to end. And then all of a sudden you reach the top and then you're down the other side. And that's exactly what the middle of a book feels like, I think. So
I'm not sure that I want to go through that again. I did it 3 times.
So that's my analogy. Yeah, I think it's that if something's not working, you know that only you can fix it. You can go to your agent for advice, you can go to your editor for advice, but at the end of the day, it's only you putting those words down.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can feel like a bit of a haul. And then I just remind myself it's a book. It's a book. It's not life or death. It's my livelihood, but it isn't life or death. And I try to think what the reader would like out of it. I try to think as a reader, because I consider myself, I think, still a reader before I'm a writer.
I think that's quite common, actually. I think most authors are avid readers. I've yet to meet one that isn't. And it's like, isn't it? You have to read to write.
Yeah. And I still get that feeling when I walk into a lovely big bookshop. Like, what can I spend now? How much money am I going to spend? I love books. I just love books. I can't imagine life without books. And so the fact that I get to write them for a living is just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
I know, it's amazing. And I know. So talking about that finally is, who's your favorite writer? Do you have a favorite? Is that like, saying who's your favorite child? Or
I'm a big fan of William Boyd, as well as the spy stuff. I mean, he touches on it. Restless, things like that. He touches on that. But I'm trying to think of the people that I would buy in hardback rather than wait for the paperback. To me, that's
you're sort of, I'm going to buy it no matter what.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think William Boyd would be one of those that I do. I really like snuggling down to one of his books, new one. And I still go back to, I'm afraid it's not very crime, but I do go back to Jane Austen.
No, I'm a big Bronte. See, I was never a Jane Austen. I'm a Bronte. I'm a Charlotte Bronte. So
see, my go-to comfort read is Pride and Prejudice, and it's a bit normal, and it's a bit, but we all need to go out of our comfort zones every so often.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, it doesn't really matter what's your favorite book. It's your favorite book, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, and we're allowed to be subjective about it. We're allowed not to like some books and to like others.
Exactly.
And I completely understand if people, are Marmite about mine.
Yeah, I think as long as people are kind, it's okay.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
So before we go, would you like to just sort of give us a bit of an elevator pitch on why we should read The Hidden Storyteller? Because I've read it already, so I think it's great, and I think you'll be gripped. And if you don't like Georgie, well, I don't know who you'll like.
Yeah. So I think if you want to know historical fiction about post-war, you want some idea of what it was like, but you also want an elevated story about murder, about a multiple killer, about the people that come together to solve that killing, then it might be your cup of tea.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and
Thank
sorry
you
for our glitch at the beginning, but we've worked it out, and it's all good. So thank you, Mandy. I will share Mandy's books in the live chat on Facebook, so if anybody wants to check out her books, that will be there, and look forward to seeing everybody soon. Thank you, Mandy, again for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody else, for joining.
Yeah, happy reading. Take care. Bye-bye.